Welcome to Legal Abuse Explained, the podcast that explains how the system can be weaponized and who pays a price. I'm your host, Ingrid Dutton. Today, we'll be exploring how legal abuse affects children. To help guide the conversation, I'm joined by Dr. Carolyn Royster. Welcome, Dr. Royster, and thank you for being
Hello.
here.
Hi. I'm so happy to
Hi.
be here. Thank you.
So, before we dive in, could you please share your professional background and why you're the person that's qualified to talk about this topic?
Yeah. Well, so I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and I specialize in children. So I work a lot with kids, and specifically I specialize in children in divorce situations. Most of the time, by the time kids come to me, there's a lot of conflict. It's very litigious, it's ongoing. It's what we would call, the term is kind of out of favor, but a high conflict divorce. And so I work a lot with kids as a clinician in that role. And then I have another part of my practice where I do coaching, primarily with moms, but some with dads too, for parents who are navigating these really high conflict, litigious divorces. That grew out of families that could not get their kids in therapy because they couldn't agree. Someone pulls consent, all kinds of issues. And so, how do I support parents outside of the role as a therapist? And in that role, coaching is very different than psychological treatment. So I do kind of both of those things. And so, I guess to answer your question directly, this is what I do all day, every day. This is,
Right.
as a psychologist, this is a huge part of my work and my passion.
Right. So with legal abuse, how do you see that in terms of clients or people you've known personally? How does that what does that look like
Hmm.
when it's happening with children specifically?
Yeah. So I think what you're kind of asking is, how does it affect kids? And I think the biggest misconception is that it does affect kids. So a lot of parents will say to me, like, well, they know nothing about what's happening in court, or we don't talk at all about our court dates, or, they don't have any idea what's happening behind the scenes. And I call BS on that, because of course they do. Kids may not know all the details. They may not know that it's a motion to restrict, or that it's a modifying orders, or that it's an order to comply, or whatever it might be, but they know that you are stressed. They know that you don't care for your co-parent. They feel and sense that tension. And of course, as parents, we know this, right? We know that kids pick up on the environment, but I think when you're in such a stressful and ongoing and kind of chronic place of legal abuse, you really want to believe that you're protecting them from it. And you absolutely can, but don't make the mistake that they aren't picking up on that chronic stress. We have a lot of research and studies around just how people pick up on, like, nervous system dysregulation, especially parents and children, children to their parents. And that's exactly what it is. That's how it affects them, right? Of course, we have some more tangible ones too. So if you're in litigation abuse, there's often a lot of financial pressure and strain. There's often, I mean, you would know better than I, but I think one of the tactics is, I'm going to bankrupt the other party, right? We're going to go until you have no money left. If you're spending all your money on attorneys and things like that, there's like the very practical, maybe you don't get to do summer camp that year as the kiddo, right? Or maybe we're not taking that family vacation because we're a little more strapped financially. So there's, I think, both really practical pieces and the less obvious but certainly more felt sense.
Yeah, and so if you're a parent who is going through this high conflict parenting situation,
Mhm.
what is there anything that you can see in your children to where it's something that it is concerning that they maybe want to find someone like yourself, either
Mhm.
in a clinical sense or in a coaching sense, to help their children process through? Because when the legal system gets involved with these high conflict parenting situations, there's not a lot of support necessarily that the victimized parent can receive. And you don't want to depend on the legal system to fix everything for you. So
Yeah,
you can
because
only, it won't.
you and I know it
And
won't.
oh, exactly, exactly. So you can only arm yourself with having the right people in the right positions to help advocate for your children. So what are some signs that a parent may need to start looking at, building up an army to help their kids?
Mm-hmm. Well, kids, it depends on the age of the kiddo, right? I tend to think about teenagers, if you're kind of working adulthood backwards or early adulthood backwards, teenagers, I think, are better about just outright telling us, right? And I think teenagers will often ask for support in a little bit different way. They may come to you and say, I'd really like to see a therapist. I'm stressed at school. And it's not at all about school. They just want to have a person. Thankfully, I think therapy is a lot less stigmatized than it was. And it's kind of cool for teenagers in some ways to be in therapy. And I think that's awesome that it's kind of seen as like, I'm growing myself and healing myself, right? So I think teenagers, kind of any request in the realm of I'd maybe like to talk to somebody, you want to honor, right? As they get younger, you might be looking for kind of less obvious signs. Things like anxiety, things like sleep issues. So I can't fall asleep. I don't want to sleep in my bed anymore. And we're like 12, right? Having you stay with them until they felt like separation, kind of anxiety that feels outside of the norm for the situation. So some anxiety is very normal. Anxiety helps us get things done and keep ourselves safe, right? But if we're getting really spun up about what if I forget something when I take it over there? Or what if they get mad? Or what if that, like, this kind of bigger than the situation calls for more than once, ongoing, repeated, is helpful to think about, like, ooh, maybe we're not doing so great. The younger kids, you see it a lot more in somatic complaints. So stomach aches, headaches, tantrums. I don't want to eat. I don't want to sleep over there, like whatever it might be. But really, what I tell parents is to look for frequency. So some behavior that you're like, this isn't typical, happening a lot more than we expect. So a tantrum that's now happening 5 times a day, and your kid's usually like a 1 to 2 times a day kind of tantrumer. The intensity, the tantrums are a great example again. So suddenly we're thrashing on the ground, we're hurting ourselves, we're scratching, like anything that you're like, whoa, my goodness, right? And then the length. So a tantrum's very normal. It's a great example. Lots of kids tantrum, teenagers tantrum too, adults tantrum.
That's right.
But instead of being able to calm them down in 10 to 15 minutes, now it's taking an hour, right? These are all signs that their little nervous system's getting overwhelmed, and that we need to pay attention to that.
Okay. So
Yeah.
back to just, I guess, quickly to define what this high conflict parenting situation looks like, because the legal system certainly can be utilized as a weapon against
Correct.
parents. And
Mm-hmm.
that's all part of the whole post separation abuse that can occur. But what does that actually look like in the high conflict parenting situation? What does that look like in terms of utilizing the legal system?
Yeah. So I think first of all, the reason we don't like the term high conflict is because very often moms in my group, my membership, will say things like, I'm not high conflict. Like, I would love nothing more than to get along with this person because I know it's good for my kids and I'm capable of it. Like, I can put my shit aside and I can co-parent because it's what's best for my kid. And what often happens is that doesn't feel reciprocated. And so the felt sense of these experiences is I can't say anything to you aside from like strictly logistics and strictly what must be done, because everything I say can be weaponized against me. So I almost think of it as like a posture. That's how you kind of know you're in this situation, where instead of saying something like, hey, look, I have a big meeting tomorrow. It's going to run a little bit late. Is there any way we can push drop off back like 15 minutes? Happy to give you 15 minutes on the back end to make up for it. Moms that are in high conflict scenarios would never say that. Never, because it would get used against them. They're already thinking about how this is going to come back in court. And then they're kind of second guessing themselves of like, but I'm also going to be accused of not wanting to co-parent with this person, even though I know that I can't say this because it'll get weaponized, right? Collaborative co-parents can do that. They can say like, of course, Ingrid, this is a big meeting. Or maybe I don't even really like you, but I can say like, yeah, that's super. That makes sense. I can make it happen. Thanks for letting me know, right? You don't have to be like best friends, but it's this posture of knowing that everything will be weaponized against you. And that the next motion, the next court order, the next filing is just around the corner. So these are parents that have to cut. It doesn't ever feel done. Nothing ever feels done, right? It's, okay, we settled this issue, but I know they're not going to comply, or they didn't then follow this issue. There's this tiny hole in my parenting plan, and it's going to get exploited. And so it just feels very relentless, and it feels exhausting. It makes me think about what you were asking me before of like what kind of support people need. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions I see is that if there's coercive control, domestic violence, psychological, sexual, financial abuse before the divorce, that's going to end once you settle it, or that they would never do anything like that to your kids. And that's just not true. Sometimes it gets worse, but you're just in different houses and paying a lot of attorney fees, you know? And I think you can speak to that even more than I can. And so I recommend people have a great attorney. I recommend they have a great therapist. And then they probably usually need someone like myself or in some other capacity who's doing coaching around how do you navigate being in this locked relationship where things aren't going to change with someone so conflictual. So like a coach.
Yeah.
I'm getting on like a little bit of a tangent, but when I first developed my membership model, it was designed to help people co-parent. And very quickly it was like, actually, it's about parallel parenting. And I teach the skills. You learn how to do this well. But the biggest gift in it is that you are around people that get it and you don't feel so alone. Because when we can't take away what's causing the issue, because we can't, we have to change how we relate to the issue, right? And one of the ways we do that is by building community that gets it.
Yeah, for sure. Because like what you said, that this isn't the end. As a parent in these situations that it's just the next step. It's just the next step. And it's exhausting, and it instills in the parent hypervigilance. So I imagine that even with the children, even though the most recent court hearing is completed, and whether they officially know that or not, they're still also anticipating what's going to happen next, because it's something that you start to learn as part of the environment that you're in.
Yeah, hypervigilance is a great word, and they're hyper attuned. So for sure that they're aware of your mood after that court hearing. Like they may not know that it was the court date today. They probably do, but they may not. But they sure know that it went badly for you, or it went well for you by the way that you're putting the dishes in the sink and throwing the meat back in the fridge and like these kids are extremely attuned to adult moods, good and bad.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's their survival strategy is being able to pick up on how everybody's doing around you all the time so that you can do what you need to do to stay safe. It's a trauma response.
Yeah. And so
Mm-hmm.
you named a lot of misconceptions already. The misconception of the high conflict parenting, that it's actually a two-person contribution to being high conflict when it's usually an imbalance of control. One person is being more of the abuser, I guess, for lack of a better term. There's the misconception that the children have no idea what's going
Mm-hmm.
on. And you've also already given some really good advice. Do you have any other advice for somebody who's in this situation, what to do going forward? I think
Mm-hmm.
therapy is very much key because,
Yes.
again, the longevity, this is a marathon that you're facing.
And this is a relationship. And so you do have to do the work to understand, what was it that was attractive to me about this person? And this is not blaming, but like, what was it that I found in them? What was I trying to heal? There was something that attracted you to them. Oftentimes it's stuff from our past, right? Um, there's this phrase, I don't do couples therapy work, but there's this phrase in couples therapy that I hate because it makes me think about my own relationship. But that like we marry our unfinished business, right? Which I'm like, oh shit, like that's, ugh, So I don't know whether that's true or not, but this idea of like, is there something unfinished that I need to heal so that I can continue to heal, right? What's the lesson here? So I think therapy is a beautiful thing. I think even just dealing with the ongoing stress and experience and having a place to process that and talk about how you're managing it is beautiful, right? I think very practically, I'm going to switch way out of psychologist mode and into just like practical um, documentation. And there's an art to documentation. There's a way to do it that is better in court systems, but also doesn't burn you out. So I have a lot of families that are just going crazy with documentation because they've been told to document, um, which is good. But I don't want people spending like their entire Sunday compiling forms. There are periods when you will, right? If you're in the middle of a custody evaluation, if you're just about to go to court, like you may spend a whole Sunday doing things, but ongoing every week, like in between these things, that is going to be a lot. So how can you kind of make it more efficient? Document what you need, document it in a way that makes sense and is actually usable and keeps your sanity, right? So your whole life is not becoming this. I think it's a little bit of the work in therapy and a little bit of the work in coaching, what we were talking about before. You have to find a way to regulate yourself because it will burn you out very quickly and it is exhausting and it is relentless. We think about trauma as psychologists, we think about it as too much, too often, and too intense, right? That's one aspect of trauma. And so you have to find a way to think about, how do I swim in this yucky, murky, toxic water and still be able to swim, right? And still have a good life and have things that bring me joy. And that takes a lot of time. So figuring out what actually regulates you and then how I relate to the pain. That's the difference, right? It may not go away, but how do I connect with it in a way that I can still keep myself, right? And so I think that all takes a lot of work. The documentation piece, and part of that work is figuring out what you can disengage from and what you can't, right? And having people with you be like, you don't need to respond to that. You don't need to say
Yeah.
that, like, actually, that's something you vent about with your best friend, or that's something you vent about with your coach, but it doesn't really need to be said to your ex,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, and so those are some tips as well. It's hard to give tips for something so complicated, but that's the truth of it, you know?
Right. Well, and I think that's incredible advice. So
Thanks.
before we conclude, can you
Yeah.
share, you have a lot of information that I think would be helpful for people to get more information from you
Yeah.
instead of this short little excerpt. So do you mind just sharing some of your contact information?
Not at all. So my practice is called Little House Psychology. And a lot of our social media is under Learn with Little House, right? Like you're learning with the bit. Anyways, we have the Kids First Co-Parenting podcast. We're on a summer hiatus after season 1 right now, but a lot of people in both of our camps kind of listen to a group of us, and you're in that group. This podcast is in this group. And then, of course, Kids First Co-Parenting is a great resource. I'm also on social media. And yeah, I offer therapy services for children. But for most folks, I'm doing co-parenting coaching. So high conflict coaching. There's a group that I run that's incredibly, I don't know, incredibly amazing. That's a lot of adjectives, but this group has been just amazing. It's a group of moms that do weekly group coaching with me, and they have lessons and workshops and templates and all the things we've talked about. Everybody in that situation is in litigation abuse. Everybody there. And that's what I hear over and over is like, it's just so nice to be in a room of people that get it. Right.
Hmm.
And then for some folks, I do like custody evaluation, audits, and like helping people through that process because it's very intense, and we look at all your evidence and things like that, or individual coaching, whatever folks kind of reach out to me and we find the best fit for where they're at and what they need.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm kind of all over.
And if people aren't ready to take the plunge to get into the full coaching and everything, you have incredibly helpful reels that you share on social
Oh
media
yeah.
that are just little snippets that
Yeah.
it's at least it's relatable. You can see those and you can think, oh, okay, it's not just me.
That is often the case. Yes. Yeah, I'm doing the social media thing. I think it's one of those things where I sometimes wonder like, why am I doing this? Are people really seeing it? And then I'll get a message from somebody that's like, this is exactly how I feel. And I'm like, oh, this is why we're doing it. Right. Um, so yeah, it's fun. It's a fun time.
It is. Well,
Yeah.
thank you again, Dr. Royster, for sharing your time and your expertise.
I'm so happy to do it.
Oh, when we love having you. And so you can find more about Dr. Royster's information and other valuable resources on afterawareness.org. And we at After Awareness hope that today's conversation has been valuable and informative. Please be sure to join us next time on Legal Abuse Explained.